Hey guys, Voltex here, coming at you with another Fantasy LCS vlog. We have just passed the halfway mark in the summer split of the LCS, and as everyone knows, there's no actual playoff format for Fantasy LCS, so these last 4 weeks, you kind of have to treat them like they're the playoffs. Obviously, they're really important, even if you went 5-0 the first half, 4-1. You can go on a 4-game losing streak, and all of a sudden, you're not in that great of a position. So, still really important to keep up your wins, keep up your points for as well. Have a little bit more stress on that. I'll talk about it later. But first, let's go into review. We'll start out over in EU with Rocket over Copenhagen Wolves. So I don't think this is too surprising at this point. Copenhagen Wolves still in complete disarray ever since the whole thing with Deficio and Dentist and all that jazz. So nothing too surprising here. I was a little bit annoyed personally. I'm sure most people who had played Rocket the week before this, where they were supposed to have the free week, and they were coming off that win against Origin, and they just did absolutely terribly. And now this week, they had still a relatively easy week. Wasn't as easy as the week where they did terribly in. But now they came into this week and they did really well, so I'm sure that's frustrating for a lot of people. In the grand scheme of things, it's a good thing because, once again, more fantasy production from more teams just means good things overall. So don't be too salty about that. Giants over Unicorns of Love. So this was a disastrous week for the Unicorns. They had a pretty easy week between Rocket and Giants, and they lost both games. Didn't really put up too many points, especially in the second game. Really did not do well. It just seems to me that they just have this recurring problem of not being able to finish games, even when they're ahead. It's definitely a problem that I don't see being remedied anytime soon. And now with this really distinctive big three emerging out of EU, that's three teams that they're not going to get points against. And now you have these lower tier teams that they're also losing to. So Unicorns of Love's fantasy value has taken a serious hit. Origin over Gambit, nothing too surprising here. Top tier team versus lower tier teams. Fnatic over H2K. So I think this was expected. Fnatic does seem to have H2K's number. The real problem with H2K with this week was that they lost to SK in the last game of the week, putting them 0-2. Really unfortunate, but you can't get too upset because they've been so good and so overperforming in what you expect from them from a fantasy standpoint. So you really can't get too upset. It was a rough week. I think they're going to come back, refocus, re-energized, and ready to go. It's not going to be indicative of the rest of their split by no means. Elements over SK. So this was good. This was a big week for Elements in general. They're able to show that they could go 2-0 against teams that, against bottom tier teams. There were close games. I know in the Elements versus SK game, they were basically ahead, or Elements was behind the whole time, and then finally Froggen's Kog'Maw was just able to outscale, and they won the game. So it was really important. It was really personally important for me because I played Froggen. I was just hoping that he would do really well, and he did. He didn't do really well. He put up 35 or something, which was good. But unfortunately, they have a really tough week next week, so they can't be too reliable. Day 2, Fnatic over Gambit. Not too surprising there. Rocket over Unicorns of Love, like I said earlier. Really unfortunate for Unicorns. Really bad, actually. It's way more than unfortunate. It was disastrous that Unicorns of Love went 0-2 this week. Origin over Copenhagen Wolves, self-explanatory. And then Elements over Giants, which is the other game that, Elements could have gone 0-2 this week, and that would have just put the nail in their coffin, I think. The fact that they went 2-0, it obviously is a confidence booster, and they stay relevant for at least a couple more weeks. And then, like I said, SK over H2K, super great for SK. It shows that SK is coming back a little bit, and they can be fantasy relevant in matchups where they have mid or lower tier teams. I don't think they're going to do great against Fnatic or Origin in the second round robin, but against basically any team besides that, I think they can now have come into fantasy relevance. So that's always nice when you get some more fantasy relevant teams. Then switching over to NA, Gravity over Impulse. Gravity's looking good. Like I said last week, Gravity's had these 2 weeks were really big tests for Gravity, and they came through in week 1 with flying colors, with wins over Liquid and Impulse. The real test is next week in CLG and TSM. But Gravity looking really strong right now. Uh, Thankfully, Impulse put up a ton of points, even though this was a loss, which is great because that's really the reason why they were drafted early. Because A, you thought that they were going to be better than they were this year, than they are playing this year. But B is that they always tend to put up points, regardless of whether they win or lose, because of their chaotic and crazy style. They tend to just put up points. So it's really nice to see. Hey, even though they lost, they still gave you the fantasy production. So that was good to see. Liquid over CLG. CLG probably shouldn't have lost this game. I was face palming as Phoenix got the quadra, also sitting on my bench. So little salty about that. Didn't cost me the match, which was good, but like I said, CLG had a really tough historical week. They get dusted by Team Liquid. Also they get dusted by TSM. So not too surprising that they had a bad week here. The real question is going to be, is this where things go wrong for CLG? Is this where they start tilting and go crazy and they start out 7-1 and then they're going to finish with only 9 wins? Who knows, but we'll get into that later. TSM over Teammate, pretty self-explanatory there. Cloud9 over TDK as well. Good thing that Cloud9 was able to, they were able to win this game, which was good. It was needed for Cloud9 fans. Dignitas over Enemy. This was good. Dignitas was a team. I'm guessing a lot of people put in Shifter, Core JJ, Gamsu, based on their good performance last week and the fact that this week they had a really easy matchup. So they definitely did what they were supposed to do in Game 1. Not so much in Game 2 where they lost. They didn't get destroyed either, but they still put up points. They definitely served their purpose if you stuck them into a flex, or even if you started them. They did good for this week, so happy with them. Gravity over Liquid on day 2, so this is good. Second part of Gravity's, showing that they are a top tier team and they should not be messed around with. Impulse over Cloud9. Okay, Impulse demolished Cloud9. This was terrible for Cloud9. They got absolutely wrecked this game. It's unfortunate, really. You're just so unused to seeing Cloud9 get trashed, and they were. Obviously great for fantasy points because Impulse, I think they had a lot of points for this game as well. TSM over CLG. Will CLG ever beat TSM? Find out next split. TDK over Dignitas. This was, a little bit of an upset. Not terrible, though, in terms of fantasy production from either. And then Team 8 over Enemy, which is, in my opinion, I thought it was a little bit of an upset. It shows a good part that Team 8 is probably developing a little bit with Nien, and that in future weeks that he could be a viable choice. I know Cali Trolls put up a lot of points, so if you're looking at him for a flex spot, that's a possibility. But yeah, so looking ahead to week 6, we'll stay with NA, and we'll start out with Dignitas. Dignitas going up against Team 8 and Liquid. So their stock goes down a little bit. Team 8 isn't really a joke. Liquid definitely isn't a joke. This is a situation where I think I wouldn't start anyone. Maybe throw Core JJ, Gamsu into a flex. If you need it, and you kind of gotta hope that Team 8's their win over Team 8 will bring them enough points to justify starting them, because they could get kind of demolished by Team Liquid. CLG playing Gravity and Team Impulse, so not the easiest week for CLG. Easier than last week, definitely, but Gravity definitely, they're showing spunk, they're showing livelihood, and Impulse is just Impulse. They can take a game off of anyone at any given time. Normally, I would say go ahead and start your CLG players, and I'm still going to say start your CLG players, but once again, it's just, will they tilt? Is this the end, the beginning of the end for CLG? Personally, I think they're going to be able to stop the bleeding. I think they have the proper structure in place. I think they have the tools to remedy any potential internal struggles that they might happen personality-wise within the team, and I think they'll be able to refocus and concentrate on getting back to that number 1 spot. So I would go ahead and play your CLG players. Cloud9 playing Team Liquid and Team 8. Probably going to lose to Team Liquid. Team 8, it's closer. Once again, I just think there's better choices than Cloud9 at this point. I would start Dignitas players over Cloud9 at this point. So, maybe if you're feeling lucky, throw Sneaky into your flex, maybe. But other than that, I really would stay away. Impulse versus Enemy and CLG. This is a good matchup just because I feel like they're gonna have a kind of long, crazy game against Enemy, which will be good. And then versus CLG, there's a chance that they could just get rocked by CLG. I don't think that's particularly likely, especially after CLG's performance last week. That being said, I don't know if they're necessarily gonna take the game off of CLG, but they're definitely worth playing this week. So go ahead and start your Impulse players. TDK going up against TSM and Enemy. They're probably going to lose to TSM. They could beat Enemy, who knows, but TDK is just a team right now. Yeah, they're new, and it's great that they beat Dignitas. They got their first win, but it's a team that you just have to see develop for a bit. No real reason to invest too much in them right now. Team 8 going up against Dig and C9, like I said. Like TDK, you gotta let them develop a little bit. I wouldn't go too crazy. Like I said, maybe Cali trolls into a flex if you're really feeling it. Other than that, I would still stay away. Gravity going up against CLG and TSM. Huge week for them. Probably gonna go 0-2, but I really, really think that this is actually great because this means that they basically, in the second round robin, Gravity has played the 3 top teams within those 3 days, right? So they played Team Liquid in day 2 of week 5, which was the second time in their round robin, and then they played CLG and TSM this week, which means that week 7, 8, and 9 means that the only top tierish team that they'll play is, I guess, Dignitas. And that's really it. And Impulse is also a team that could win at any given time. But other than those 2 teams, Gravity has a very easy schedule to close out the season because they had the top 3 teams in the beginning. So I think that it's worth it to pick up Gravity players this week. If there are Gravity players that are on the waiver wire, Altic, Hanser, Keen, Move, Fufu, any of them, I would pick them up. I wouldn't start them this week. I would stick them on your bench and hope, just hope that it doesn't bite you for that specific week. But sit them on your bench and then enjoy them for week 7, 8, 9. That's what I would do. Liquid versus Cloud9 and Dignitas. I think you got to start your Liquid players. They definitely can beat Cloud9 and they definitely can beat Dig. I think it'll be a little harder against Dignitas because they have shown some spunk. But yeah, go ahead and start your Team Liquid players. And then Enemy against Team Impulse and TDK. TDK is not so free anymore because you don't really know, and they're probably going to lose to Impulse. So I would stay away if you're real desperate. If you need maybe a flex person, throw in Otter, throw in Inox to your flex. But that's about the extent that I would go. And then last and least, TSM playing TDK and Gravity. Probably going to be TDK. Gravity, like I said, you can't underestimate them, but once again, it's TSM. You got to go ahead and play your Bjergsons, your Wild Turtles, all that stuff. And so with TSM, I just want to touch a little bit on on Wild Turtle and the potential of Keith taking over. So Wild Turtle definitely performed how he was supposed to in terms of KDA. I don't think he had a massive week point production wise, but he definitely where he needs to be. So if you're a Wild Turtle owner, I wouldn't get too upset. I know you probably picked them first, second, so I wouldn't get too upset about that at this current stage. All right, switching over to EU for week 6. Fnatic up against Giants and Copenhagen Wolves. Obviously, go ahead and start your Fnatic boys. H2K up against Elements and Unicorns of Love. Yeah, they had a rough week last week, but there's no reason to think that they won't bounce back and be H2K this week. Origin with the same same matchup as H2K against Elements and Unicorns of Love. So the big 3 you can definitely start. And then this week for EU, you actually have 3 lower tier teams that are worth starting, and that's SK, Roccat, and Gambit. So Gambit is up against Copenhagen Wolves, which is pretty free at this point, and also against Roccat, right? And I would think that Gambit Roccat game is probably going to be a little bit of a longer, drawn out fantasy bloodbath. So I think that Gambit you can start this week. SK also up against Roccat. So you could, and their second game is against Giants. Giants haven't looked that great. Sure, they did beat Unicorns, but I feel like that was more of a weakness of Unicorns. So SK, and then Roccat is playing SK and Giants. Roccat is playing SK and Gambit, excuse me. So these are all games that can either any of these teams can win between the Gambit playing SK and Gambit playing Rocket, right, and then SK playing Rocket. Anyone can win these games. So I think between Rocket, Gambit, and SK, obviously I wouldn't start them if you're on the same team. I wouldn't have like Nuke Duck at mid and Candy Panda on as your AD carry, because I think that's a little bit too risky unless you really buy into the idea that it's going to be a fantasy bloodbath for everyone. But other than that, I think that you can have some really good flex options between Gambit, Rocket, and SK. Overall, I think EU is going to produce a lot more this week than NA will, mainly because EU has essentially, but the big three all have pretty free weeks in their respective wins, and then you have these three mid slash low tier teams that could all have potentially big weeks. To stay away from in week 6 for EU, Copenhagen Wolves, stay away from until further notice. Elements has a really tough week against H2K and Origin. Unicorns of Love, also really tough week against Origin and H2K. So I would stay away from both of them, as well as Copenhagen Wolves. And Giants, they have to place Fnatic in day 1, so not going to be great. Sure, they can beat SK in game 2, but in order to start them, you would just have to hope that the amount of points they get from SK will justify starting them overall. So I would stay away from Giants. But overall, EU is going to put up more than NA this week. Another thing with NA this week is tough because no one has 2 easy matchups. With NA, you have like CLG is going up against Gravity and Impulse, which, you know, that's not a super easy week. Dignitas going up against Teammate, but also going up against Liquid. TSM going up against TDK, but also going up against Gravity. So not too many situations where you have these like definitively like, oh, they're going to go 2-0 this week, 100%. There's a potential for some serious 1-to-1s in NA. So definitely prioritize your EU players for this upcoming week. All right. So now you have a lot of tools at your disposal for stats, right? So now you have the week by week that screen that you go into, and you can check and you can see who your team faced or who the player you're going to play is, who they faced, how many points they put up against it, all that good stuff. And now the stat sheet is becoming really, really relevant. You get a pretty consistent view of how many points per game your players are producing. You can see where they rank among other top laners, other mid laners, how they rank overall. So a lot of resources are really coming into effect at this point in the season, so don't hesitate to use those. So some matchup disparities that I found interesting this week. So I realized that I'm 4-1 in the league that I talked to you guys about. I'm 4-1. Tied. I'm in second place. I'm technically tied for first, but I'm in second place because I have about 80 points less than the first place person. So I wanted to, like I said last time, I had a couple different options that I wanted to make some trades because I wanted to bolster my mid. And so the trade that ended up getting accepted was Mithy for Ryu, right? And Ryu has a little bit more points than Mithy, I think, maybe like 5 or 6. But it's like, Mithy is definitely more positionally relevant than Ryu is. So it's a situation where it probably wasn't that great of a trade on my end, because Mithy probably is more valuable than Ryu, but not to me personally, because I was struggling. I had Froggen, and Phoenix was the only mid that I have, and he had a great week this week and a good week last week, but sometimes he just puts up 18 randomly, right? So I really needed him, right? And then on top of that, why I think it'll help me in the long run, because the person who's in first place for me is a H2K bot lane. He starts them every time, right? He'll start Yarnan and Kasing, who have been putting up crazy points. It's really tough to compete with them. So now, since I have Ryu, and I also have H2K's team, I have Origin and H2K as my teams, I'll be able to do some insurance, right? Some damage mitigation, where if they have a big week, it probably means Ryu will have a big week, and if I'm playing H2K team, they will also put up, a solid 40 spot, right? So that's good for me in the long run and in kind of catching up to the points for, right? And then obviously I have my bot lane being Yellowstar and Reckless, who can at any given time be putting up these 60 point weeks. So I think that was a really good trade. I'm really happy with that. I think that it'll really propel me to these last 4 weeks for being able to not only maintain my lead in terms of wins, but also start slowly closing this point gap that I'm going to need to do over the next 4 weeks to actually take the W. Luckily, I do have the head to head right now against him. I beat him in week 1. I don't know if I'll end up playing him again later in the week. But we'll see. So yeah. So specifically with this week, between Quas and Impact, the matchup that I always worry about. I've actually lucked out with this matchup because every week that I've played Quas or every week that I've played Impact, they have actually put up more points than their counterpart, which is pretty great. I'm really happy that that's worked out. But I also really like that they're NA, so I really don't have to worry about waking up kind of early to check out the matchup. I can change it up at 2 o'clock on Saturday. So that's good. But this week I'm leaning towards Impact, mainly because I'm probably going to end up playing Phoenix. I might flex, and I'm not too big of a. I don't like to stack players on my team. I know if you ask me questions about who to start, a lot of the times if you have multiple members in a team, I'll try and limit that. Obviously, there's exceptions, Reckless and Yellowstar being one, where you just know that the team's going to have a really good week, so you don't have to worry about it. But so I'm probably going to play Impact at top just because I don't want to double up on Liquid with Quas and Phoenix. So probably going to go with Impact at top. I'll have Amazing as my jungler, Ryu as my mid, Yellowstar and Reckless as support. I don't know if I'm going to go with H2K or Origin as my team. I might go with H2K, even though I think Origin will get more points just because I'm worried about H2K going off, like getting a bunch of points and creating a bigger difference in that points for category spread, right? Because it is something that you got to start worrying about at this point in the game. Obviously, your main goal is still to get the W, but it's more relevant to get those Ws earlier in the season because it doesn't matter if you have the most points for if you're 1-5 or 1-4 at the midway point. So nowadays, you can really start thinking about putting more effort into your points for. Obviously, your main goal still has to be to get the win, but you can tinker around a little bit more with the idea that you're trying to get points for that category potential tiebreaker. That could happen, and a 9-game it can totally happen where you have the same record and it comes down to a head-to-head or a points for. So yeah, yeah. So overall, I also dropped Core JJ for Altic. I'm not going to start Altic this week. I don't, it's just too risky to start him against CSM and CLG. But I will surely be starting him the rest of the split after week 6 because I think that they're going to do great. So I definitely think that investing in Gravity this week, even though you're not going to play him, is a smart choice. So yeah, that about does it for this week. I hope you guys won your weeks last week. I hope you guys win this week, and I'll catch you guys next time.